Hi there, I am Kululwa Motwa and I welcome you to today's episode of Property Market Moves. Today, I am sitting with Nigel Adriaanse and we're talking about enterprise development. Hi Nigel, how are you?
Hello Kululwa, I'm absolutely fantastic, thank you. Yourself?
I am good, thank you. I actually like your title. I was looking at it just the other day. Chief Empowerment Officer.
Yeah, I changed it from chief, what do you call it, chief executive officer, because I find myself, I didn't want to be known as somebody who's sort of like up there, I rather prefer the empowerment because that's what we are, what we do as EDPF. We are an empowerment organization, and I felt it more appropriate that way.
All right. I love that. So talk to us about, firstly, before we get to EDPF and the work that you do, who is Nigel?
It's a complicated question. It depends on who you ask. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you he's a long-winded buffoon. If you ask my children, they say, he's just dad. If you ask anybody in the industry, you will find that I'm somebody who has had plenty of experience in both enterprise development, business development, as well as the property sector itself. So I've had about more than 25 years of experience now in both. I was one of the first people and the first chairman to be involved in black umbrellas, what used to be called Shinduka black umbrellas. The concept development way back when, 20 plus years ago, Charles and I sat and we conceptualized the incubation program, which is now, in my understanding or belief, the second biggest incubator in the country, after one other, which I won't mention. But that's where I sort of cut my teeth in enterprise development or business development. I am a business advisor. I'm a mentor. But on top of that, I'm quite heavily entrenched in the property sector. So I've gone the entire gambit of financial manager, property manager, facilities manager, all the way to asset manager within the property space. I've worked for 2 listed funds, black-owned listed funds on the property, property sector, REITs, real estate investment trusts. I've also worked for some bigger organizations like Brawl. I worked with Brawl. Sorry, I didn't work for Brawl. I worked with Brawl, and I worked for JHI at some point in my life. So I've run the gambit of all the different sort of managerial components of property. The last portfolio I managed as senior asset manager was a staff complement of over 200 people. I was the senior asset manager at a 20 billion fund. So I have managing staff, property management, etc. So that's who I am from a business perspective. Married, 2 kids. Well, they're not kids anymore. They are both adults, working adults. And in fact, my daughter just celebrated her 30th birthday 3 months ago. So I'm not as young as I look.
That's always a good thing. So from an EDPF perspective, what does enterprise development look like? Okay,
so I've had many discussions and sometimes even arguments with people about what enterprise development in the property space must look like. In my opinion, there are 2 different kinds of enterprise development in the space. So one is for the development of businesses that will become service providers, albeit they own their business. It's still a service provision. So one thing that I've always argued with people about, and there are lots of institutions, businesses that run incubators, and you are well aware of some of them, where those incubators support entrepreneurs in terms of developing their business to become service providers. Now, that isn't enterprise development per se. It is supplier development, in my opinion. And again, that's just my opinion. I just look at it from a perspective that that's supplier development. Like I said, I've had lots of arguments with people about this issue. In fact, I think it was a cyber event actually one day, I made the statement and I was lambasted by one of the members on the panel to say I'm a bit too loud when it comes to this discussion. And it sort of shut me up a little bit, but I carry on. So that's the one side, the one side of enterprise and supplier development.
Yeah.
My opinion on what enterprise development should be in the property space is where we develop businesses or entrepreneurs who want to become property owners. Now, that is very clear in the vision and the mandate of EDPF Academy and Incubator. Our vision is to change the landscape of property ownership patterns in South Africa. Now, to understand this vision, we have to go back to the apartheid years, as we always do. Now, I'm not saying that we can continue to blame apartheid, even though we probably can. But if you go back into history, you'll understand why EDPF even exists in the first place. Because during the years of apartheid, Black people could not own property. We all know this. It's not something new. It's not something that I have to educate people on. It is ultimately, in my opinion, apartheid was a land grab. And a lot of people will agree with me on that apartheid was a land grab. And if you look at why it was a land grab and why it's important for property ownership to be transferred into the hands of the majority, and I'm going to be very controversial from now on in, where, for example, the latest act that has been enacted by Parliament, the Expropriation Act, there's been lots of debate about the necessity for it, or the need for it, and the and what that act actually should be allowed to achieve, and what it should do, and what power government should have in terms of the act. So I'm not going to get into that debate today, because that's going to keep us busy for like 20 hours.
I agree.
I have put out some videos. Yeah, I have put out some videos recently in my 10-minute property tips, which is free to the public. They can find it on my website. I think it's videos number 25 and 26, where I speak to the topic. But what I want to discuss is the issue of empowerment because of what happened in the past, in our apartheid years, and what is happening now with regard to the Expropriation Act. So, and we are going to probably discuss what laws and stuff has recently come to being to tackle the issue of enterprise development, and we'll leave it for them. But with regard to apartheid, the fact that for many decades, we as Black people, and when I say Black people, I mean the generic BBEE Black, non-white, historically disadvantaged, whatever you want to call us, we have not, previous to apartheid ending in 1994, we had no right to own land. Now, with that kind of legacy, it is a very difficult task, and it's going to take a very long time, and 30 years just isn't enough for us to have transformed the sector. And many people will say, oh no, the BEE thing must come to an end now, 30 years is long enough. It is nowhere close to long enough. We need to have a policy that, and a lot of people say that BEE has failed because it has benefited only the elites and the well-connected, and I won't argue with that. We need to find a way to empower the man on the street, or let's not be sexist, the human being or the person on the street that has a legacy where we've lived through apartheid and our children are still suffering because of it, where there is no ability of somebody today to be able to say, or very little ability to say, I want to become a property mogul. And I don't have any connections. I don't have any legacy or history of my family being involved in property, but I now want to become a property owner.
Yeah.
If you look across all of the enterprise development stuff that's happening in the space, you will not find many people that are talking specifically about transforming the sector from an ownership perspective. There are very few people talking that kind of language. And that's the mandate of EDPF. We have a very specific mandate in terms of making sure that we transform the sector, but not in a way where there is a continuous thing of I need to be getting a handout from government. I need property companies to hand over their properties to me. No.
Yeah.
Empowerment isn't about handouts. Empowerment is about understanding what it takes to become a property owner and then implementing those policies, procedures, business advice, guidance, support, whatever you can get to be able to build a property portfolio, not receive a property portfolio for nothing. So as a proponent of enterprise development, my focus is to say, let's not rely on government, number one, because government has its own mission to achieve certain equalities in all sectors. All right.
Yeah.
And government will do certain things and put certain policies in place to be able to hopefully achieve that. But as a sector, we need to all, first of all, work together to be able to achieve those policies and work within those frameworks and not just go and occupy land illegally, because it is illegal to occupy land without a court order. So we should shift our focus from expecting these things to come to us for free and rather think, how can I, as an individual or a group of people, because you don't necessarily have to do it on your own, maybe an individual or group of people, how can we empower ourselves with the help of government and private institutions? Because let's face it, without a legacy, it is almost impossible for somebody to build a property portfolio. Some of us have been able to do it because we just with grit, we've been able to go from nothing to a property portfolio. Some of us have failed miserably. I've had 3 businesses fail in my life. I've lost lots of money on property investments. I can share different examples of I've lost on one property. I lost R500,000 rand. On another property, I've lost 750,000 rand. And I can go and list many opportunities where I've lost lots of money in my own capacity, either personally or in business. But then I can cite lots of other examples of where people have empowered themselves, or groups of people have empowered themselves and been successful. Some of them within the EDPF program. We've helped manage almost R1 billion rands worth of transitional properties now already in the 8 years that we've been in existence, for example. And that's what true enterprise development, I believe, is all about. It's not about a handout. It's about a leg up to say, okay, as a business, and I know I'm already answering a lot of your questions, so we could probably skip a whole lot of questions later. When I talk enterprise development, I say to a big corporate, and I'd like to, if it's okay, mention just one example. There's a legal firm, which of the top 10 legal firms is, in my understanding anyway, I haven't done the proper research, but when I started working with them, they were the only level 1 BEE company in the top 10 legal fraternity. Okay. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but I know when I started with them, that was definitely the case. Basically, what McRobert attorneys have done, they have said, okay, we will allocate through pro bono work, which they have to do anyway. We will allocate some of that time to EDPF and its mentees. So over the last 8 years now, in our 9th year, they have supported our program and our students and our incubators and our mentees with over 8 million rands worth of legal work at no cost to those students. And what they've then done is every year, on average about 1 million rand, they've said, we're now going to allocate that 1 million rands worth of work towards our enterprise and supply development spend, which is a proper use of the time and the energy and the enterprise development codes of good practice. And then we as an institution, the mentees that we have, all benefit from their services. And they benefit by getting the enterprise and supply development points. And all towards the empowerment of these Black entrepreneurs towards owning their own property portfolios. They've written up offers to purchase, lease agreements, shareholders agreements, and a whole host of other things that they've done for our students.
Sure.
And that, in my opinion, is true enterprise development.
All right. And I think
to answer your question in a very long.
That's a very nice example. I like the example that you've just cited with a legal firm that needs to do pro bono work, and they allocate that towards, actually doing that work to the benefit of these enterprise development beneficiaries. What would the benefit be for the property owners to actually do enterprise development?
So I'll tackle it from two angles. Those who already own property and need BEE points, for example, and those who want to become property owners. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to embarrass somebody today, unfortunately. I won't mention the name. But in 2017, I remember it as clear as it was yesterday. I was busy doing a consultation for an existing company. It wasn't one of my students or one of my mentees. It was in fact my previous boss.
Okay.
And I say previous because it wasn't my last boss. It was my boss prior to that, when I still lived in Cape Town. So when I went back to Cape Town in end of 2016, he asked me to help him with getting their BEE level back to level 1. Black-owned business, but they were at level 4 at the time. So they asked me to bring them and come in and help them to get back to level 1 again, because when I used to work for them, we were at level 1. But unfortunately, because there was nobody looking after the BEE strategy of the business, they dropped down to level 4.
Okay.
So I went in and I helped them, and within a year, they were back to level 1. Because it's actually quite simple to become level 1 when you are Black-owned and you do the right things within the 7 different criteria that you need to conform to. So I helped them to go back to level 1 again. But then the following year, they dropped back to level 4. And there was a simple reason, and I sent an email on this topic to try and change it, but unfortunately, up to today, it still hasn't changed. On the 13th of December 2017, I sent this mail. I said, the codes of good practice within the BEE sector has one particular flaw that is almost insidious, where in procurement, if you look under the codes for procurement, the wording says procurement is the purchase of goods and services, including that of a capital nature. Now, just think about that for a second. If you're buying goods and services in as a property company, all right, to be able to keep your level at a high level, all your purchases, including that of a capital nature, have to be from Black-owned companies, SMEs, women-owned companies, etc., according to the code. And that would be perfect, except for the fact that they include the words. They included the words that said, including that of a capital nature. So, in this particular example, this company had purchased in the development of a hotel the previous year 30 million rands worth of goods and services to revamp this building into a hotel. All right. Actually, no, I lied. It was 72 million rand in total. But the year that I was specifically focused on, there was 30 million.
Okay.
In that same year, they decided to buy a building for 100 million. Now, just think about that for a second. You purchase goods and services for 30 million. You've got 39 points in your enterprise and supply development, full points, 39 points of the 117 points you require. Okay. All of a sudden, that 39 points became 3.9 points because they bought this 100 million rand building from a white company. And what's more insidious about it, the white company received 3 bonus points because they sold to a black business. Now, hello? How do you go from a company that is black owned doing all the right things and they lose 35.1 points, dropping them down to level 4 from level 1, and the white company that sold to them gets 3 extra points for selling to a black company? I mean, so I wrote this email, and unfortunately, nothing has happened. That code still reads the same. Now, that is one aspect of many that I can cite where white-owned companies, the ones that need to transform, have a certain benefit over black businesses that are trying to grow. And that's why I mentioned the 2. So from an enterprise development perspective, what previously, and let's call them previously advantaged businesses, okay, let's call them PABs, PABs. They need to look at black businesses that are trying to come into the sector to purchase property, to become developers, to become property investors, owners, etc. Look at those businesses and say, how can we, as experienced businesses that have all the resources, including the manpower, the skills, and the money, and obviously the portfolio, how can we support up-and-coming black entrepreneurs through our enterprise and supply development programs? Now, as you know, and maybe some people in the audience won't know, the enterprise and supply development skill, that part of the codes, you, as a business, you need to give 3% of your net profit after tax towards enterprise and supply development. Okay, in order for you to get 15 points of the 39 within the ESD spend. It's quite a complicated thing, but at least this is simple. You've got to spend 3% of your net profit after tax on black empowerment opportunities in the enterprise and supply development space in order to get your 15 points. Now, some companies have been clever, and in my opinion, okay, let me not use the word that I wanted to use, but taken advantage of this particular code. And what they've done is they've said, we are going to help you as a business. So that's now enterprise development. And then we are going to upskill you to become a supplier to us and the market as a whole. All right. And now we've upgraded you from enterprise development to supply development. So now they get all 3 points. But they get another additional bonus point because they've now taken you from an enterprise to a supplier development. And that they get another bonus point. So instead of getting 3 points, they're getting 4 points. So they've very cleverly used the ESD spend in a way to benefit them, but not to then empower people to become property owners, but rather suppliers to them and the market. Okay. Now, that's all good and well. It's great because it helps businesses in the industry to grow: architects, quantity surveyors, town planners, engineers, cleaners, security guards. All these sort of peripheral businesses are benefiting from those programs, and that's absolutely fantastic. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't be doing that. What I am arguing for is that we should focus some of that attention and some of that 3% of net profit after tax onto people that want to build property investment businesses, property development businesses, and the like, and help those people to become property owners, property portfolio owners, and eventually become listed entities themselves. And for me, that is what big business can do, is to support these black entrepreneurs who want to do all these things, whether it be become a supplier or ultimately to reverse the effects of apartheid by supporting black entrepreneurs to become owners in property. Okay, so that's on the one side. On the other side, easy enough. Stop thinking that government and or business is supposed to give you a handout. As a black business that wants to get into the sector, nobody's going to respect you and support you if you just expecting and waiting for handouts. Look for a leg up instead. Look for an organization or a government institution, and I can mention plenty of them. Gauteng Partnership Fund, the NEF, the Development Bank of South Africa, NHFC, and many others, which are government institutions or DFIs, development funding institutions.
Yeah.
And then there are businesses and banks and so on that also would be quite willing to assist you if they see that the jockey, the entrepreneur on this side, is willing and able to put in the effort and sacrifice to say, I want to become a property investor, a property developer, and I will give everything that I have, what they call skin in the game. Now, there are lots of ways that you can put skin in the game. Your time, your skills, money, land, and probably other things as well. So if you've got a parcel of land and you say, I want to develop this land, you bring on a few specialists and you need in your sort of ambit at least about 13 different specialities that you're going to require to do a development, as an example.
Yeah.
You need to bring these specialists in, either on a pro bono basis, where they do work for you for free, as part of their enterprise development, like I've explained with MacRobert and other institutions that support the program, or on a risk basis, if you can't afford to pay them. All right. So they come in on risk, and they can either say, look, I want a piece of the business for my effort, or you can pay me when the funding is in place. All right. But you need to bring these skills in, because none of us have the ability, not even me, having been in the industry for 25 years. I can't draw an architectural plan if you put a gun to my head. I can maybe do a bit of the work of a quantity surveyor because I have an accounting background. I have a BCom in accounting. But I'm not a quantity surveyor, so I can't manage the time and attendance. I can't manage the costs in terms of bricks and mortar, etc., etc. QSs do that because they are qualified to do it. I'm not an engineer. I can't do engineering work. I'm not there's so many things that I'm not. But because I understand the whole process, I can manage those people. All right. And that's what enterprise development is all about. Developing that entrepreneur who is willing, able, and has some kind of skin in the game. Now, the biggest problem, as we all know, is the skills and money. Those are the two big problems. Yeah. And those are the kind of barriers to entry that EDPF is trying to break. We've basically broken the first three. It's the fourth one, which is the funding side, that we are still working towards breaking. And as you know, we built our own crowdfunding platform to be able to do that. And that is now slowly starting to pick up momentum. But in terms of the entrepreneur, he or she has to have at least something that they are putting into this program that they want to now take and enhance. All right. It's not about coming in with absolutely nothing and thinking that people are just going to give you stuff so that you can build a portfolio. No, it doesn't work that way. Even if you know nothing, at least you can give your time. You can give whatever resources you have. And then you are worked with either with EDPF or any other organization. I'm not trying to sell EDPF as the place to go, but there are other institutions that you can go to as well. You can get support. You can get corporates to help you as an individual. And the more doors you knock on, the greater the opportunity, or there's going to be a greater opportunity for somebody to say yes. There's a very famous sort of story about Colonel Sanders, who knocked on 1,000 doors with his recipe, and eventually somebody said yes, and now he's one of the biggest. The company is one of the biggest franchises in the world. And unless you're willing to do the hard graft, if you're willing to go knock on 1,000 doors, your business will not be successful. And that's the responsibility of the entrepreneur. So on this side, it's about supporting through enterprise development. On that side is to say, how many doors do I knock on to eventually have somebody open the door? And you're going to have a lot of no's. I think it was Thomas Edison that said, I've not found 1,000 ways of failure. I found 1,000 ways of not making a light bulb. I think it was Thomas Edison that said that, and I may be misquoting. But every time you fail, don't consider it a failure. Consider it a way not to do something, and then build on that. Either do it in a different way. There's a saying that goes, insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Okay. So if you failed a particular way, consider it to be a learning experience and a stepping stone towards one day being successful. And that's what I always tell my incubatees to say, guys, you're going to have to graft. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to put in your time, your money. You may even get to a point like I did at many times in my life where you actually are illiquid or bankrupt. But if you keep pushing, people will recognize, and then they'll eventually say, you know what, I think I'll take a chance on this guy or this girl or this lady or this man, because I can see the effort they put in. So that's the side of the enterprise, the entrepreneur that wants to receive enterprise development. They have to graft first. They can't just say, go to one of the big boys and say, here I am, and I'm an enterprise development person, come and support me. It doesn't work that way. You got to get yourself to a level first before anybody will take notice.
Okay. Now you've spoken to the legacy of apartheid, which we all know is how then we got to this point where we're trying to redress, some of those barriers. And you've spoken passionately about ownership. Why is it important for Black people or previously disadvantaged individuals to strive for ownership?
Okay, have we got another 20 hours?
Just a short one. Just a short one. Why is it important?
In order for us to redress the ills of the past, and as I said earlier, apartheid was a land grab. In order for us to redress the ills of the past, we need to reverse that. The only way we are going to change ownership of the economy as a whole, we need to start on the base level. Like building a house, there's a foundation. Okay, and it's very appropriate that this analogy is used in the property space, exactly for that very reason, that you start your property journey with a foundation. Okay, and to expand on that, when you want to build a house, you've got to start on the foundation. You got to dig first, get rid of all the ground, lay your foundation so that you can have something strong to put your property on, your house or your building or whatever. Okay. Yeah, you want to build on, exactly. So you've got this foundation. Then you can build your walls, put in your windows, your doors, your floors, and then ultimately your roof. And then you come and you make it nice inside. Now that same analogy you can use building your whole portfolio. The foundation is you getting into the industry and building a solid base. All right. And in order to redress the ills of the past, we have still the majority of property that's in private hands. Now, I specifically say that because there's been lots of talk about how the numbers are skewed because government owns a big chunk of the land of South Africa. And that is true. There's no doubt about that. Government owns through municipalities, through the provincial departments, through national and the different 27 odd different departments that we have in government. Government owns the majority of land, actually, in terms of the biggest percentage of land. But if we exclude government and we only look at land that's in private hands or in company or trust or whatever, there is no mistaking or no argument that anybody can make to say that black people now own the majority of land. It's just not true. All right. Whether it's 7% or 40% depends on who you talk to. All right. But ultimately, the minority of or the smallest amount or percentage of ownership is still in the hands of the majority of people, and the biggest percentage is still in the hands of the minority of people. That is just undisputed fact. And anybody who tells you otherwise is just has an agenda. Okay, yes, I've also got an agenda because I want to transform the sector. But ultimately, anybody who tells you otherwise has it. So now we say enterprise development is important because the land and the property, the majority is still in the hands of the minority.
Yeah.
And we need to redress that because that land was taken by force. And if anybody now complains that land is going to be taken by force through the Expropriation Act, I say boo-hoo. However,
okay,
I don't agree with it. I don't agree that we should be taking land by force. I believe that we should build entrepreneurs so that they can feel proud that they've built something from scratch. Okay. However, it is important because the foundation of the entire economy of the world is based on land. Whether it be land to build properties for rental or for things like student accommodation, hospitality, farming, and mining. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. The foundation of the economy is built on property and land.
okay.
And as Mark Twain so famously said, buy land because they ain't making no more. The population of the world is growing, and land stays the same. We have one planet, unless, of course, you want to go to Mars with Elon Musk. We have one planet, and we need to all share those resources equally. So if we are going to do that in South Africa, we need to look at the majority and say we need to somehow redress the ills of the past in apartheid and give back the land in some way or shape or form to the indigenous people of this country and the people who lived on that land many, many years ago, decades and millennia ago. But ultimately, share the wealth equally amongst our people. Now, I'm sounding very much like a socialist when I say these things, but I'm very much a capitalist because I believe in becoming, to empower yourself and not receive handouts. So in that sort of, that's where I split paths with socialists, is to say I'm very much a socialist economist, socialist capitalist, because I do believe in free trade, and I do believe that people can build themselves up and redress the ills of the past by building themselves up. But we do have to start with a foundation, which is property, and in that way transform the entire economy, not just the property sector.
All right, sounds good. Now, to that business owner who is convinced because they've listened to you speak passionately about, the need, undisputed need to do enterprise development, and they actually want to start, where would they start? Where could they start?
Okay, so that's a very difficult question. The other ones were easy. This one is a difficult one. And I'll tell you why it's difficult. Because every person that I come across has a different need, a different history, a different legacy, because history and legacy is two slightly different things.
Yeah.
And different connectivity. As my friend Andrew always says, your network is your net worth.
Is your net worth.
So if you've got a weak network, you need to start there as an example. So it depends.
Sure.
Where you start, it depends on where you are.
Mm.
So the answer is, very simply, the answer is start where you are. Okay. But where you go from there depends on your vision and where you want to go to. So in my program, I have students who say, I just want to have my first home and then one other property where I can rent it out. Others are much more ambitious and they say, I want to build R1 billion property portfolio that I can list on the stock exchange. Okay. So obviously, for these two individuals who are at the extremes, you need to work differently with those two. And those two have different starting points and different end goals. All right.
Sure.
And depending on who you're talking to and which individual entrepreneur it is you're talking to, you will start at a different point. But the very simple answer to the question is start where they are. So somebody who owns nothing, as an example, they haven't got a job, they don't have any form of income stream, they don't have any kind of connectivity with anybody, no real network, they don't have any legacy. So they're starting literally from nothing.
Yeah.
Now you've got to work with that person to say, how can we build those resources? So I would, for example, one of my students who is in this very position, I've said, okay, the first thing we need to do is to build your network. So we get that person into different networking associations, EPIC, M5, CYBUP, obviously, SAPN, all these institutions that are out there that are based on networking. All right. Then once they build a good network, the next step is to say, now we need to build something that sort of a grouping of people that will be your base of your base network. So we need an architect, we need a quantity surveyor, we need a town planner, we need an engineer or engineers because they're different fields. We need an accountant, we need a lawyer, we need a tax consultant, we need somebody, preferably a lawyer that will do your trust. And. So there's about 13 different disciplines that you'll need to build around you.
Okay.
Then you would probably go with the option of becoming a sourcing agent to be able to build your experience in the industry. And what I mean by a sourcing agent, somebody who sources deals. So there's somebody who wants to sell a property, but there's a potential for some kind of investment enhancement. Okay. Or aggregation or something like that. So you take a property and you say, so I've got one student in my program at the moment where what he does these sort of flipping deals.
Okay.
Where he takes the property that is currently working on the deal, where the roof is a bit broken, and the ceilings are completely destroyed. How that ever happened, the Lord alone knows. Because it's probably like somebody was dancing on the ceiling or something. The cupboards are all the cupboards are all broken, and the person wanted 850,000 rand for the property, which, if the property was in a good state, would have been a reasonable price because in that region, a 3-bedroom home can easily go for 1.1, 1.2 million. So instead of 850, he offered a 550. Because he says, I'm going to have to spend a couple of 100,000 rand to even get it to the 850 level. And then I can maybe sell it for $1 million and make some profit. And we can share that profit in a joint venture. Because I can't buy the property from you. I have no money. I've got no income. I can't even do the renovations except my own physical because he does maintenance work and stuff. He can take his own skill and his own time and invest into this joint venture. Okay. And I'm just using this as an example of somebody who has nothing except one skill. All right. So he's now done a deal. I wrote up, the lawyers always take too long. So I just wrote it up myself. I did a joint venture agreement. And he's now signed this joint venture agreement with the owner of the property. Where she will get 550,000 rand for her property. But only after it's been sold to a third party. Sure. And that's what sourcing is all about. You take a property, you take a deal, you package it, and you say, okay, cool, I want 50,000 out of this deal. Now you go to the investor and you say, I'll give you this deal for 600,000 plus whatever costs they are. So he can make a little bit of extra money on top of the sourcing fee of 50,000 Rand. So he can make, say, another 100,000 Rand on the fixing up of the property. But ultimately, the investor will pay 850,000 Rand for a property that would then be worth 1.2 million. Everybody wins. The seller wins because they're getting a reasonably good price.
Yeah.
The sourcing agent wins because he or she gets a sourcing fee plus, in this case, also the fee for doing the renovations. The investor wins because they get there's a gap of at least about 250 to 350,000 and a profit they can make. And that's what sourcing is all about, and possibly flipping. Flipping is where you actually buy the property. You renovate it, you hold on to it for a little bit until the markets turn, and then you sell. But then you actually own the property. You're not sourcing it for somebody else. So those are the types of ways that people with no money can get into the space.
All right.
Build
Sounds
a network,
good.
build a team, and source the deal.
Okay. Now you've spoken to some of the challenges that enterprises, as they are trying to build themselves up, will face. You touched on skills, you touched on finance, and you've spoken to, the network being the net worth. What other, major challenges that you are solving for in enterprise development?
Okay. So in my experience, and I'm not saying that it's the only things, but in my experience, there are 4 barriers to entry. Okay. Barrier number 1 is understanding the industry.
Okay.
You cannot go into an industry if you don't understand. And the way that challenge is overcome is through education. All right. And that's one way that businesses and government can support entrepreneurs within the property sector, is to help them either through a subsidized program or just as an example, the National Housing Finance Corporation on the 28th of March, as you know, you were there, announced the new incubation program to support entrepreneurs that are emerging developers. Okay, so that's a very good example of how institutions can support Black entrepreneurs who want to get involved in the space through education. Okay, that's one aspect.
All right.
The second one is support services. The second biggest thing, problem that people have, and often it is said in the whole incubation process, that sometimes people don't even need money. Sometimes they just need the support of other businesses, people, to be able to become successful. So the second barrier being support services, corporations, organizations, businesses, and government can give support through incubation programs where they give access to specialists like architects, quantity surveyors, town planners, etc.
Sure.
And again, EDPF offers that as well as part of the program. Then the third one is access to the market. The access to market is the big one, obviously, because if you don't have an access to the market, you can never own a property portfolio. And through these programs, we must have some kind of networking infrastructure where the entrepreneur can gain access to the market through networking, through institutions and businesses like, for example, Property 24, Private Property, and others. Where there are places where they can go to find deals. Mostly networking, because if you look on the platforms like the Property 24s and the Private Properties, by the time you look there, it's already too late to do a good deal. You need to have a good network of real estate agents, of sourcing agents, etc., to be able to have access to the market. And then the final one, which is the biggest one, is money. Most of us don't have the legacy of having a family that has money to be able to put into a deal. Now, the biggest problem is that lenders will most likely only give you between 50 and 70% debt, and you need to find the equity for at least 30%. In some cases, like TAF, for example, they will go up to 80%. And because you're a Black entrepreneur, through the Intutuka fund, they may even give you another 15%, but you still have to come with that 5%. So there are ways to overcome that equity barrier, but that is still a very big barrier, and hence the reason why we built the crowdfunding platform to help people to raise that equity portion through crowdfunding.
Okay.
So bringing a whole lot of people, everyone put in 10,000 Rand. Before you know it, you've got R1 million, and you can then build a portfolio of 5 million Rand because you can get 80% debt. So that's sort of the biggest barrier is the equity portion, what funders call the skin in the game, where they say you need to either bring the land, because I don't care about your experience and your time and all of that. You either bring the land and we value the land, or you bring money in order to put in your equity side. So those are, in my opinion, the 4 big barriers of entry: education, understanding the industry, support services, access to the market, and ultimately access to finance.
To finance. And from your perspective, how important is mentorship, and skills transfer if you are going to do like a quality enterprise development program?
Next to finance, it is the second most important thing in my opinion. Obviously, money, it's there. It's like up there.
Yeah.
The rest of it over here. Support and mentorship sits right here next to financing. Because unless you are getting that support that's going to get you to that bankable feasibility that most funders require, you are never going to get the money unless you have the skill level to build a bankable feasibility. Unless you actually have the experience yourself, in which case you don't need the enterprise development anymore, or not as much anymore. But unless you have those skills already, you're going to need a team around you to do that. And that's where the mentorship comes in. Mentorship isn't teaching you how to be a quantity surveyor. In this particular case, mentorship is about how do you manage the process from having nothing to building your portfolio to a point where you can get funding and actually then have a portfolio. That's the role of a mentor, is to take you from where you are to where you want to be, because you can't get there on your own, because it's close to impossible. Even those people who are self-made in this industry, and you talk to any of them, they've had some type of mentorship in their life, either their father or mother or uncle or auntie or grandfather or whatever had the experience to impart to them in how to build a business. And then they took that skill, brought a bunch of people in with them, and then together built a property portfolio using the skills that they learned in a spousal shop business, for example. Because ultimately, you can translate the business skill that you have in any industry to then build a business in any other industry.
For sure.
So your mentorship is more about the teaching the business skill rather than that specific business. And then ultimately then the person deciding that's what I want to do, and then bringing in the specialist to help you get there.
Now, in the ordinary course of business, whether it's public or private sector, there is consistent pressure, to deliver a service and quality delivery of that service. And we associate the enterprise development, component as a learning phase, right? So now in my need as, Kululwa Enterprise, who has an opportunity and I need to deliver a service and with quality, how do we merge the requirement, or at least our responsibility, to still ensure that enterprise development happens without necessarily compromising on the need for quality service delivery? How can the two exist?
Very, very important. Yeah, very, very important question, because you're right. We can't build, and I can cite thousands of examples. I was involved many, many years ago when I was still doing just straightforward business development stuff for an organization called Business Beat, which was funded by Deloitte, if I remember correctly. there was a company who this guy was a spray. He did spray painting for cars, and he went to a business to say, give me some money so that I can buy a machine that will help me to expand my business. And he then got the money, 300,000. I remember very clearly the machine cost 300,000 rand. But within a year, this business was dead. It was gone. It was finished. And I can cite many such examples. But this example is very clear to answer your question. Without the support of a business development manager, of a mentor, through these types of programs, that person did not know how to handle the expansion. So it's not just about getting somebody from A to B, but actually from A to Z, to a point where they have a business that's expanded and growing, all right, already. Because one of the biggest problems in business, in successful business, is that businesses get to a point where they now have to expand. They have no choice but to expand, because they can't, if they stay stagnant, they'll eventually die anyway. But then they forget to hold that business that is currently going, to keep that business going while they expand. Because if this expansion goes wrong, your entire business is dead. You need to have that fallback that is your base, your foundation again. I can just cite two examples very close to where I am right now, of a prawn farm and a what's the other one? I can't remember the name of the other shell fish. That anyway, it's two farms that very close to where I am, that were in that phase of expansion and then collapsed completely because they didn't keep their business going. And that's because they didn't have people that were there supporting them and saying, hold on a minute, don't let go of what you have. Keep this going. Maybe put a business manager there to look after it or whatever, while you seek the expansion and grow this business. And that can happen because of either lack of funding, which in most cases that's the case, or just losing sight of the opportunity. But in this case, for example, of this guy with the spray painting business, he forgot or didn't realize that the machine itself wasn't enough to be able to grow the business. He needed more supplies of paint. He needed to upskill his staff to use the machine. He needed to not only upskill his staff, but employ more staff to be able to handle the volume that was going to come in. And he didn't lose his business because of mismanagement of the money. He lost his business because he did not know how to manage the growth of his business. And a business mentor would have helped him. Somebody of good skill, not somebody who's became a mentor yesterday and read some stuff in a book. A very funny story, that one day I was doing this talk in Joburg, and Elon Reyes of Reyes Corp spoke. He asked to speak before me because he needed to go somewhere. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He came to speak, and he said, this month I've had to employ another business development manager, and I had 30 people that I interviewed. And as a business development manager, obviously you're going to be supporting small businesses to help them grow. And I asked him a very simple question: what is an income statement? And he asked, guess how many people knew the answer of the 30 development agents that came to interview? And I raised my hand. I said, probably only one or two. He said, you're right, only one. 1 out of 30 business development agents who came for interviews knew the answer to that very basic question: what is an income statement? So you need somebody that has the experience, somebody that has walked your journey, knows the industry, and has the network themselves. So all those things that they want to impart to you, they need to have themselves, and not just book knowledge. So choosing a mentor is very important. Knowing that mentor actually knows what they're talking about is just as important. But in terms of ranking, that support is just as important, or maybe just a little bit less important, but not much, than funding of a property business.
Okay, now, do you think, and this probably is one that, you're just going to jump on because it's a little controversial. Do you think that the property sector is doing enough to support the intention of enterprise development policies?
Now you're going to get me going. Oi, I'm going to try and be as the least amount of controversial than I possibly can be.
Okay,
Because
maybe what more?
Really gets
what
my
more can the sector do? What is the sector not doing?
Have they even started? That's my question.
Really?
Really? Have they even started? We have not even scratched the surface of what can be done. We haven't even scratched the surface. There's a question about kickboxing, right?
Yes.
Where you've got seven different aspects of the codes of good practice within the BEE codes. And the industry has long been accused, and I believe rightly so, of, and not just property, throughout industry, have long been accused of being tick boxes, okay? Or box tickers, box tickers. Where we say, okay, cool, ownership, right? What can we do for ownership? All right, we'll give shares in the business to our staff and our management, and we'll create a scheme, put it in a trust, and that's for the benefit of shareholders or of staff and management for as long as they're working in the company. Okay, and that's all good and well, and it works and it helps. And then other institutions and businesses have created schemes where they say, okay, 25% of our business we're gonna sell to Black people through a scheme, and we've seen big businesses do this. And then they create a scheme, and that goes into a company or a trust managed by themselves most times, or others in some other cases, where they lend the money on a soft loan to businesses, to organizations and individuals, and you can then you're stuck there for 10 years, and then you can eventually sell your shares or do a share swap between the BEE shares versus the actual share on the stock exchange. We've seen many of those schemes. In some cases it worked, in other cases it failed miserably. In the property sector specifically, those kinds of schemes have been few and far between. And they have been for the benefit, in most cases, not for the general public. So in that case, I would say that tick that they have should actually be a big X. Then you look at other things like senior management, directorships, all of those other aspects of it. My focus is purely on the enterprise development tick box. Okay. And there, as much as most corporates have actually got a tick because they've done what I suggested in the beginning of this interview, that they've supported enterprises to become it's enterprise supplier development, they become suppliers. The biggest mistake everybody has made, I can't think of a single business that has specifically built into their enterprise development the transfer of ownership. Transfer of skill, yes, there's been lots of that. And the Jobs Fund has put a lot of money into skills transfer. Recently, they've given big monies to like Tough and others, which is fantastic because the skills transfer then happens. But the transfer of ownership has been completely lacking. And that's why I say we haven't even scratched the surface. Skills transfer is one thing, but actual ownership transfer, whether that be through some scheme or through some incubation program or through some mentorship and guidance and soft loans, we can do all these things through our enterprise supply development programs. But there's been a lack of what's the word? there's been a lack of let's call it will. In politics, you call it political will. In this case, it's development or enterprise development will. To say, are we willing as an industry that owns the majority with the minority, but we own the majority of property, privately held property. Government again, privately held property. Are we willing to put our own skin in the game in order to transform the sector by allowing Black entrepreneurs into the game? They have made it so difficult. The financial institutions themselves, and I talk a lot in fact, I'm going in June, I'm going to the Western Cape Development Forum as well to talk about this very topic. They've made it so difficult for Black entrepreneurs to break into the sector by making it difficult for them to raise capital. So the financial sector, as well as the property sector, have in fact worked together to make it difficult for Black entrepreneurs. And this is the very controversial part that I'm now saying. They've actually made it difficult for Black entrepreneurs to break into the sector because they want to hold on to what they have and in fact expand their empires and forget about the small man or the middleman or whatever, to be able to empower Black entrepreneurs by working with them to be able to then transition ownership of property. But then they've also worked where the banks are working from the other side to say, you need to conform to what was in the past, where you need to have certain criteria to be able to lend money from us. So they've made it very difficult from both aspects to be able to break into the industry. And there are very, very few programs that will give that leg up to assist people who don't have the legacy and the history of a balance sheet to be able to build a property portfolio. So the answer to the question is, not only have we not even scratched the surface, that once you get underneath that initial layer of skin, the epidermis, I think they call the external layer of skin. Once you get through that initial layer of skin, you'll find that there's so many more layers to get through.
It gets even murkier
eventually.
My goodness.
Exactly.
Nigel, we have run out of time, and I think there's just so much that we could dive into, in this conversation. We certainly need 20 hours to have this conversation. Thank you for your time, and I trust that everyone that is listening now fully understands the importance of enterprise development and really making an impact, intention actually towards driving an impact in the sector. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me.